Welcome, everybody. Hello, welcome to this Q&A with RedThread. We've called it Skills Strategy and What Comes Next, which means we're going to cover some really valuable questions about the whole skills scenario. And we've got Stacia and Danny, who in my mind are certainly skills royalty. So I'm delighted and very excited to have them on this call. So if you have any questions during today's webinar, please place them in the chat. If you have any technical difficulties, please place them in the chat as well. And a member of our team will help to troubleshoot those. And then lastly, if you're interested in any resources related to today's topic, please take a look in our related resources section. So, quick introduction from me. My name is Teresa Wykes. I'm part of our talent-centered transformation team here at Eightfold. Stacia, would you like to introduce yourself next?
Yes, hello everybody and welcome to today's webinar. We're so glad to be here and so glad that you're here as well. I'm Stacia Garr, I'm co-founder of RedThread.
And I'm Danny Johnson, I'm the other co-founder of RedThread.
Okay, great. Okay, so I think we're going to cover a few various different aspects of the whole skills world here. I think we're going to start off with a poll, is that right?
That's right.
Okay. I think just to get us started, I think it's going to be helpful just to find out from the audience today how far along you are in your journey to becoming skills-based. So you can see you've got some options there. Let's just give everyone a chance to look at that and then we'll get started. Okay, so I think I'll just get started with our first question. Oh, here we go. Here we go. We've got some results now. Okay, interesting.
I was really hoping for a couple of fully embedded because then I wanted to talk to those people. This looks about like we see in other organizations.
Does that reflect what you would expect, Dania and Stacia?
It does. It absolutely does.
Okay.
Yeah, we do have a few folks in there though with scaling enterprise-wide with measurable impact, which, you know, as I reflect on what we saw, let's call it just 2 years ago, we wouldn't have even seen that. So, so those folks, come find us. We want to hear from you and understand what you're doing.
Even the people that we have on our podcast now always start with, okay, but we're just getting started. We're not experts in this. We're just getting started. So I think there are a lot of people toward the beginning part of this journey.
Yep.
Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for participating in that. So I'm going to start with exploring a little bit about how we might define and understand skills-based approaches. And I think if we could start, so I could always rely on Danny and Stacia for some straight talking and, you know, cutting beyond the buzzwords. Today in 2025, what would you both say that being skills-based actually means?
Well, I will start. I would say that first, we actually don't use the term skills-based anymore. And the reason for that is that it connotes that an organization is only using skills data at the exclusion of other types of data or throwing out other information that we may have. And we know that in reality, that's not what happens. No organization is like, hey, you know, we've got this great assessment data and we're not going to use that to make talent decisions. We're just going to use skills. Like that's just, it's not accurate. And so when we talk about it, we talk about using skills data as a complement to the overall set of data that we have when it comes to making decisions about people and designing talent systems. And so today, if I'm talking about what is an organization that's doing this well, it's using skills data where appropriate, it's using other types of data where appropriate, but most importantly, it's having a data-driven approach to the overall talent system and making decisions in the organization.
Yeah, so when we think of skills, we think of it almost, I wouldn't say exclusively, there are a lot of things that go into it, but we're talking about skills data, we're not talking about skills. We often say that doing skills for skills' sake is stupid. Unless you have a unless you have a reason for it, there's really no point in going down this path. It's really hard.
Thank you. Okay. How important is it then that you have a solid definition of skills versus a fair attempt in an organization's skills framework to be able to measure impact like that? I mean, I think certainly we have a lot of conversations when we're out there about, right, how solid does it need to be? How detailed does it need to be? You know, what would be good enough versus, perfection?
Yeah, so are you talking about like the definition of the word skills? What is a skill? Or are you talking about sort of a strategy, like Dropbox?
The strategy, yeah, probably the strategy. Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, so I mean, you're seeing on the screen our 6 elements for a skill strategy. We think that understanding these is important. We also know that there is no perfect. There is no perfect anywhere. And it is continually evolving based on what your organization is doing and the needs of your organization, as well as the technology that is available and new developments when it comes to data and all those types of things. So I think it's pretty important to have a blueprint. When we see these 6 elements as things that we use to describe what a skill strategy should include. But there's no such thing as perfect. And we see far too many organizations get into that problem. They think that they need it perfect. They think they need a perfect job architecture. They think they need a perfect team. Sometimes they jump in with tech first. None of those things are going to get you what you need. You need an overall strategy or general direction of where you're going, and then you need to be able to adapt as you go along.
Yeah, I would just add to that, so much of what we see with organizations comes down to scope and purpose, right? So like, in this question, how important is it to have a solid definition versus a fair attempt? Well, so much of it depends on what you're trying to do. What's the scope of the work? How big? How many types of roles and people? And what are your objectives? Because if your objective is just to dip your toe in and get started and begin to understand what's happening here, then you're kind of faith effort, or fair attempt, I think was the way the question was phrased, is fine. But if you're trying to use it to make really important talent decisions and to move and help people move into different parts of their career and all the rest of that, then you're going to want something that's higher fidelity. But it really just depends on where you are as an organization.
Thank you. Do you think, I'm thinking of conversations that I've had out there. There have been organizations that have said, oh, well, we've given everyone like 5 skills. Everyone has the same. There's no more than that. Have you got any kind of anecdotal, examples that you could give us about sort of the numbers of skills that people are assigning to people in the workforce? Yeah. Where it works and why that's good enough?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And kind of back to Stacey's point, it really depends on your scope and purpose. So we've seen organizations say, you know what? We know that everybody in our organization needs this skill, and we're going to throw L&D dollars and performance and everything at that. So they define one skill. Like, this is where we're going this year. We've seen other organizations that say, why would you even dip your foot into skills unless you understand all of the skills? Clearly, the more skills data that you have, the more decisions you can make, but the more complicated it gets, the more data streams that you have, and the more sort of harmonization that needs to happen and all of that kind of stuff. And so we haven't seen a trend yet. Some organizations are going all in and they're doing as much as they can, as fast as they can. And some organizations are being much more pointed about the direction that they're going and the skills that they're leveraging.
Yeah, interesting. And have you seen like a certain type of skills that companies are so everybody has to be AI literate, or everybody should be good at project management, or, data analysis, that kind of thing? Could you talk about that a bit?
It also depends on the industry and what you're trying to accomplish. So Vijay Krishnan is a really good example of this. She's the CLO at Ericsson. I use her as an example a lot. I really like what she's doing there. She's the CLO, and so they take a look every year and say, all right, for our business to continue the direction that it wants to go, these skills are the most important skills. And so they have anywhere from 1 to 7 skills that they're like, these are the ones that we're going to focus on as an entire organization. At the same time, they've also put systems and structures into place so that people on the ground are analyzing what skills are necessary and deciding what types of skills should be in place. And so she's taking sort of a both and approach. Here's everybody needs these skills, and only a small percentage of people need these skills in this section. And so we're going to sort of isolate it to this. When we talk about scope and purpose, we've done a couple of workshops where we have people come in and walk through these 6 steps and put a strategy into place. And the first step is defining your scope and purpose. And the reason that that's first is because all of these other 5 things depend on that step, defining your scope and purpose. And so sometimes we get an L&D team that comes in and says, I'm the L&D team. All I really care about is personalization of, getting information to people that are going to help them build the skills that the organization needs. So I'm going to draw my box around that. My purpose is to get the stuff to people that they need, and the scope is just learning. That's the only thing I'm doing. Or sometimes we'll have somebody come in and they'll say, okay, I'm looking at skills for our tech department. So that's my scope. And my purpose is to make sure that everybody has this type of tech, everyone has AI skills moving into the next year. And so the definition of that scope really defines everything else. Some organizations have come in and they've tried to boil the ocean. But I've also been really surprised at the number of organizations that have come in that have started somewhere else. They're deep into tech or they're deep into architecture, and they haven't considered their scope and purpose. And almost always they have to circle around and decide exactly what they're doing right now. It doesn't mean it's the only thing that they do, but if you start there, then it's easier to build on than trying to boil the ocean all at once.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true. We've had a comment in the chat that it's challenging to build a skills-based strategy in large organizations because skills are moving so fast. Yeah, have you seen any examples of how to keep on top of that? What's the skills refresh, rate? How often are you seeing companies, change their skills taxonomies or their lists?
Yeah, all the time. There are a couple of ways to look at architecture, and Stacia could talk much more deeply about this. But the high-level ways that almost everybody can kind of understand is there's an ontology and there's a taxonomy. Taxonomies are usually tied to job architectures. This job requires these types of skills. Therefore, these types of skills are the things that we're going to measure for this job. And then there are ontologies, which are a little bit more flexible and allow people to take a look at overall the skills that we have in our organization. And if they have the skill, then it's likely that they have the skill. And so it's a much more relational type of arrangement. Both of those are accurate. I have completely lost the question. Teresa, can you repeat that?
Just how to keep on top of skills. Like how often would you actually refresh or update your skills requirement list?
Okay. Yeah, and it really depends on the organization. In some organizations, they don't have to be updated that often. Traditional organizations, some of the industries that are changing a lot right now, those need to be updated quite a bit. Technologies can help with that. But really, the thing that we've seen work the very best is a dedicated team for skills in the organization trying to stand on it.
Yeah, I would add to it that it also depends on the function or group within the organization. It's not necessarily the same across a single organization. So we were talking with one organization that's pretty far along with this, and they really focus on making sure they have up-to-date skills and competencies and other information on their engineers and their technologists. But for HR, they don't put as much in, they don't have to update that as often, just because the skill sets are not changing quite as frequently. That's not to say that they aren't changing. Of course they are, right? But it's just about the frequency. And the other thing that was embedded in what that leader was telling us is that it's also about where do you drive the most business value. So for them, they are a technology organization, and so the business value is driven out of the engineering function. And it's less driven out of HR. And so that's, again, another reason why they've made that decision, because there's only so much time and energy. And so they put it in the place where it's going to drive the most business results.
Yeah. Agree with that 100%. Just going back to architecture, I think, lots of people get a bit hung up on the job architecture side as well. Can you be skills-based without a job architecture?
Yes.
You can, but it's challenging. So, I mean, we have some really good examples from our podcast where we've interviewed folks who, you want to even talk technology, some of them have literally done it with like basically, Excel. And so you can do the question is how difficult is it going to be for you to do the things you want to do, and how long until you see the impact that you want to. So with with the job architecture, we're seeing a lot of organizations return to job architectures right now, also in conjunction with some of the work that they're doing and understanding the work that's getting done in the organization and various responsibilities, but not trying to, again, boil the ocean all at once. They're focusing on the highest values roles, and they are doing the job architecture work there and then kind of expanding from there. An alternative approach, though, that we've seen is for skills that we know are really critical in an organization. I'm going to go back to the Ericsson example. They saw a focus on AI that was essential across the organization, and they did that across the organization that required no focus on job architecture. It's just these are some skills that every single person in the organization needs to have.
Yeah, and it also depends on sort of the structure of your organization. Like a professional services firm, for example, may do much better without a job architecture because job architectures are a lot squishier there, whereas in organizations where the job is defined by the skills you do, might do better to leverage the job architecture.
Okay. I do want to talk a little bit about different types of organizations, as you've touched on it. We've had a couple of questions about how do you get started with skills in a smaller company? Obviously a larger company is going to have access to resources, huge volumes of data, different systems, different resources, that kind of thing. You talk to us a little bit about, if you're working in a small to medium-sized organization, how that might look in terms of a skills approach that would be different from a larger company.
Yeah, the difference is, you're right, there aren't as many resources, but the difference is also in a lot of cases it's less complicated. I think everybody should start with the business use case. Like, why are you doing skills and what problem are you trying to solve? And then go from there. And in that case, it doesn't really matter if you have a gigantic team working on it, or if you have just a few, you're solving the problem. Stacia mentioned an organization that we talked to that was trying to solve a frontline problem of we're losing too many people within the first 3 months or whatever. They did it on paper. They did a paper and pencil approach and were able to do it. We do not recommend that. But there are technologies that can help both small organizations and larger organizations. And it also depends on, again, the scope and purpose. Like, is this organization-wide? Are you talking about a specific area? Is this 3 people? Is this 10 people? Those types of questions are really going to define what types of technology you need, but also what you can do with the information you get.
Okay, thank you. So if we move on to looking at implementation and actually getting started, we had a few questions asking how do you actually get people on side with you? How do you actually get people interested in this, and how do you get your stakeholders engaged? And actually, I think to understand, I think we often assume that hiring managers understand everything about talent, and they understand everything about skills, and they understand everything that HR understands. But I think there's often a gap between that. So how would you go about, say, opening up the conversation with a hiring manager or with a business stakeholder so that it would suit your purposes?
I can take that one, Stacia. In our workshop, we do an activity where there's basically a foursquare, and we ask them to put on that foursquare your champions and your detractors and measure them against how influential they are. And so the first thing, I think one of the first things that organizations need to do is figure out who their champions are and who their detractors are and how much power they have in the organization, because those relationships are going to be the key ones, right? And so figuring those people out and then going to them and saying, all right, we can improve your business, or we can improve the business by doing this in these ways. Again, bringing in the use cases. It's how you make detractors into champions. A lot of times what we see is people say, oh, we need to do skills. without a definite reason for them to doing skills and without getting the people on board that actually need to be on board. That step is, we have found, so key. Like making sure that you've got the right team is so key to making sure that it can drive across the organization.
Stacia, would you add anything on that?
No, I think Danny said it well.
Okay. And what would be some low risk strategies for testing a skills-based approach in your organization? You know, what would be a kind of, what would a pilot look like, let's say?
I'll jump in there. I think the most important thing, and this goes back to what Danny was just now saying, is figuring out where is there a strong use case where you can make an impact with skills, and focus there first. And, you know, skills is one of those things that we actually hear business leaders pulling as opposed to HR pushing. And that can make a big difference in terms of finding a good use case where a lot of business leaders are like, I get the reason here, like, let's get this going. And so that is what we're hearing from folks, is find that use case where you can show impact, make sure that it's something that's going to have high visibility, where you've got a leader who can influence others to want to move forward, assuming it's successful, and then make sure you're very clear on the metrics that you want to track to show the impact that you're hoping for.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, having champions and having them evangelize to others is a good way to influence. I'm just going to look at a couple of our questions coming in now. Thank you very much. Keep them coming. We've got a question here. Given the pace of technological change in our organization, many of our team members are facing operational challenges that aren't necessarily tied to a single skill. How does skills-based learning account for broader cross-functional operational needs, like adapting to new systems, workflows, or ways of working that don't fit neatly into a specific skill category? So we're talking, I think, about, you know, the need for people to be agile here.
Yeah. We have an internal debate about whether agility is something that can be taught. I don't know if it can be taught or not. And that needs to be key to every single business out there right now. Everybody needs more agile workforce. I think this goes back to, if I'm reading it correctly, it goes back to, are these gigantic skills that the entire organization needs, or these specific skills? The other thing that I would note there is the writer was very articulate in describing, you know, new systems, workflows, ways of working. Those types of things often aren't training issues. Often they're organization issues. And so does the system make sense itself? Can we design it so it doesn't need to have a training? Can we design it so it doesn't even need people? Where can we take out all of those? So it becomes more of a system design problem than a training problem. So in a nutshell, take all of it out that you can take out of it as far as learning goes, and then define which skills you need broadly in the organization and go after those.
Yeah,
I'm glad I think also...
Stacia, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I think also this gets to the point that skills are, as much as we love them, they're not everything. Some of this actually is behaviors, right? And behaviors in some ways are different. And so it's important to remember that some of this is not necessarily about just defining a skill and getting people to, you know, learn that skill, but actually, you know, being clear on the behavior, hiring for the types of behaviors that people exhibit, et cetera, and putting that into place in the context of the systems that Danny just mentioned.
Yeah, and I'm glad you raised that, because I think the skills are like the what, aren't they? But the behavior is like the how, and you can track that through onboarding. You can track that through performance management as you go through. You can, it's a sort of a much fuller picture. Okay, I'm just going to go back to some questions here now before we move on to another poll. You mentioned detractors to skills strategy implementation. What are some reasons you've observed preventing complete buy-in? Actually, I'm going to save that until later, because that's really a challenge, isn't it? I'll move on to that later. Bear with me. Actually, let's go to the poll. Let's go to the poll now, and then we'll come back to that question, because I quite like that one. Okay, so another poll for everybody, please. So what is the biggest barrier holding your organization back from becoming skills-based. We'll just leave that there for you to pick your favorite option. Okay, maybe we can have a look at those results. Okay. Oh, interesting. Yeah. Danny, Stacia, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I mean, the 35% down at the bottom, competing priorities and limited resources, I think that holds true. A lot of people are doing skills off the side of their desk rather than dedicating the resources that it actually needs. We're currently working with an organization just a little bit who their L&D department is doing it. And is that an okay way to do it? Sure. But a lot of times it doesn't get the time or effort that it needs in order to make it work well. And when somebody's doing it off the side of their desk, they're not aware of what else is going on in the organization. And so often it's very focused skills effort and something instead of something more broad that can be used throughout the organization.
I'm also surprised that oh, sorry, Danny.
I was probably going to say the exact same thing. I'm surprised the lack of leadership alignment is so low.
Yeah, actually, I was going to go to the limited data or technology. I'm surprised that's so low. And that may just be my own bias because I'm right now in this skills data architecture study, and in that there's so many challenges that come with the data and the technology and connecting the data to be able to pull all this together. But I thought that might have been higher, but that also might be because we have a number of folks who are earlier in their journey. And what we've observed is that at the beginning, some of this is, for those initial use cases, you can kind of stitch the technology together reasonably well. It's when you try to scale it that you hit some of the limitations that I'm seeing in that study.
I just wonder, Lisa Evans just said basically that we are 4 years into implementing a skills framework in Java. Our largest challenge on adoption is technology, connecting all our processes that provide visibility into the value skills we can offer.
Yeah.
Okay. I lost a bit of audio there, so I'm going to ask a question. So hopefully this won't just repeat what you said. I'm interested to know where you think most organizations trip up. And, do they trip up for the right reasons or the wrong reasons?
I mean, these are all trips. I think somebody mentioned that it's hard to choose just one. The one that comes out most in the workshops that we've done is unclear strategy and business case. Clearly, they're self-selecting into a skills strategy workshop, so that might be super biased. But the unclear strategy and the business case we see a lot. Like they're trying to do skills for no reason, or they aren't really clear on the things that will make a strategy successful.
Okay.
I would add the other limitation is around, which we don't really have on here, is around responsibility and accountability. So not necessarily being clear on who is driving this effort, whom they need to have involved in it, getting all those players on the same page. And that's not the same as leadership alignment. It really is kind of around the team that's coming together to make this work. That's another area that we see folks get tripped up on pretty commonly, or that prevents them from getting started.
Okay. Could you talk to us, Stacia, a little bit about, like, if you've got an ideal team that is doing skills or looking after skills, like what are the roles within that, and who are the people on that team? If you could create a dream team.
Yeah. So I think that there's a number of folks. I think, again, my bias, because of where I spend a lot of my time, is around data. So my first place would be, who's the data team? What are they if it's from people analytics, great option. If you have folks who are in a centralized data team, analytics team, that's good too. But you need to make sure that you have data, and you need to make sure you have technology. So that's part of the team. You very clearly need to have an owner with a vision of what this is. What is the problem we're trying to solve? That can come from any number of different parts of certainly HR, but the organization more broadly. For some, we see it from the learning team, and we want to understand what the skills are that we have, and how, we can get people upskilled, et cetera. Sometimes we see it from the workforce planning team. We want to understand what is happening with organization and what types of supply of skills we need for the future. But the point is you need someone with a vision on that team. Then you also need to make sure that you have relevant stakeholders throughout the organization. So I already mentioned IT. Legal is a big one, particularly if you're operating within Europe. You're going to want to have your HR technology organization involved. You will want to have your talent organization involved as well. And then you're going to want to have business leaders as well as probably some employees, because some of the adoption is going to come from employees themselves, and you need to make sure that their perspective is included. Danny, would you add anybody to that list?
I don't know that I would. That was pretty thorough. Yeah.
So that's brilliant. But how are organizations actually doing it in your experience? Like what is that team? Is that the team that you observe, or is it actually a version of that?
I mean, I think eventually they get there. Like if they're going
exactly.
They get there. They usually start in a smaller thing, like HR will be like, we need skills, and they'll go off. Or L&D is one where we see it a lot, or operations sometimes. They're like, we need to understand whatever. And especially with the conversation of AI coming in, I was hoping we would get further along in the discussion before that came in. But as it comes in, we need to understand what AI can do and what people can do. And that's a combination of skills and tasks. Often it's starting over in operations or in the business functions.
Okay. So that is a good time. Let's pivot a bit to talking about AI within skills. We've got some questions in the chat that I'm gonna throw out there. AI is obviously transforming the skills landscape right now. So what would be the emerging threats or pitfalls in using AI for skills assessment? And how can organizations balance innovation with responsible data use?
That's a great question. So I think a few things. One is that we know that AI can be really effective for helping us, particularly as Danny mentioned earlier, understand skills within an ontology. So which skills relate to which other skills. Can also be used for helping us infer skills that somebody might have. So if you have X skill and Y skill, it's likely you have Z skill. And I think that those are some excellent ways that AI can be used. And some of the areas to make sure that you are cautious about are, one, around making sure that, just because, for instance, you inferred the skill, that somebody actually has it, and the degree to which they have it, if degree is critical to you. So that's one thing. The second thing is context. So, you can say that somebody has a skill of project management, and in one part of the organization that means something, and in another part it means something else. But if you don't bring along the context of project management in what format, that can create some real challenges for you, because the AI just sees project management. It doesn't see that bigger context.
Yeah, and I want to add a little, this goes deep into sort of skills verification. How do you verify a skill? We've written some research on that, and we have some more coming out on skills verification. There, as Stacia mentioned, she was talking a lot about inference. If you're using AI to infer skills, we're also seeing AI being used to verify skills in really different ways. So we're seeing a lot of chatbots come up that can sort of like measure you as it's chatting with you about what kind of skill and knowledge you have. We're seeing live sandboxes that are using AI to determine what kinds of skills you have. And so using it like that is a little less sort of squishy and a little bit more ethical than just inferring skills based on sort of latent data in the organization. If you want more information, please contact me. I'm so deep in skills verification right now. I'm dreaming about it. And we can give you like the 7 things that we see plus the 56 methods that we see for verifying skills, how you might do that, what you might want to pay attention to, all kinds of decisions you can make with that verification data, which varies greatly.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you talked about that. We did have a question that came in earlier about identifying the people who are not screaming their skills from the rooftops. People who are kind of quietly highly skilled at certain things, but not actually sharing that with the world. How do you get that skill information? Should you get that skill information?
I mean, those are 2 different questions, right? How and should. You can ask for it. You can ask for that skill information, but if somebody's a backyard chemist in their free time and they would do your company good to bring those in, you got to ask for those skills. You're not going to be able to get them any other way, and I don't know that it would be ethical to get them any other way.
Yeah. No, of course. We've got a nice question here. With AI looking at tasks and automation, what are the best practices for a skills plus tasks strategy so that we can determine if the role is best for a human versus an agent? So we're looking at which pieces of the work do we give to an agent, which pieces of the work do we keep for the humans?
Yeah, this is an ongoing discussion with us and every single other provider out there. That's exactly what we need to figure out. I mean, we don't have a pat answer that we can give you. I think AI is good and can be leveraged probably more than it is right now to determine the tasks that need to happen in an organization. I think the challenge is determining the tasks as it applies to the ideal versus the task as it applies to your particular context or the way things are done in your organization. So we've seen some big, huge hiccups where somebody comes in and they're like, oh, we'll just have AI sort of like fix this or, replicate this process, but the process is on paper or that's in people's heads isn't actually how it works. Sally needs to call Doug on Thursdays to make sure that the right information gets put into the right place in order for blah, 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 blah. And so it definitely needs to be done. I think AI can get us a long way there. I also think that we're entering this space, and I would love Stacey's thoughts on this too, because I don't know that we've talked about it, but I think we're entering this space where work needs to be redefined. Like we've been sort of band-aiding it forever. And now within our organizations, we need to define what is the work being done, but also how is that work being done so that we can decide, can it be automated? Is it finite enough that we can automate it and we'll get the same sort of result every single time? Or does a human need to be in the loop? And if so, then what are the skills that are needed in order to do that work?
Yeah. And keeping it consistent in line with, does this work actually develop me? Does this work engage me? Because if you're having the whole skills thing, I think empowers people. It gives people a lot of transparency and it gives people choices that they maybe weren't able to make before. So if you're going to break down that work into who does what, it needs to be consistent with that, for it to make sense and for you to get engagement. Stacia, sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to add, actually, I'm going to comment on what you just said and then go back to what Danny was saying. I think the other thing that we need to be conscious of is when and to what extent and for what reason might we still want to have a human doing some of this work, which might be automatable. So one of our kind of favorite examples internally is around data cleaning, right? We run surveys, we collect a whole bunch of data like others do. And, would it be really nice to just push a button and have that data suddenly be clean? Yeah, but we learn a great deal by going through the data and cleaning it and understanding kind of where maybe people didn't understand the question or where there might have consistently been anomalies in the data or something like that. And so, while it looks on the face of it like a really boring automatable task, it feeds other downstream effects that ultimately makes the work product a lot better. And so I think one of the conversations that we will need to have, whether it's with regard to work product ultimately or just sheer development, particularly of junior talent coming into the organization or earlier stage talent, is what by automating are we removing in terms of kind of our long-term capability or quality of the work that comes out. So that's a conversation I think we need to be having, particularly with task time. I think back to this question about, the one that was submitted about best practices. I think I would go back a little bit to what we were talking about a few moments ago about job architecture and skills. And we're seeing folks who kind of dive in that next level down, where it's job architecture, skills, and tasks to understand kind of the full stack, if you will, of what goes into a job today. And so looking at the tasks in the context of the rest of that, I think is important, because it gives you a sense of, again, context. You know, that's the thing that we risk losing with all of this, is the context in which a task is done, as well as the relationships that have to be in place for the task to get done. You know, it's important for us to be thinking about, if an AI is doing a thing now instead of the human, is it going to get the same results as the human did? Because there may be more either follow-on information that's necessary, or there may be just fundamentally a relationship component, right? Like somebody gives somebody information because they're a human and they trust them, versus an AI where they're not sure where it's going to end up. It might end up with there's different results. The human part of all of this, I think, is what we need to make sure we're not losing.
Yeah. And staying on that theme then, how would you position the value of a skills? I know you don't like the terminology, but how would you position the value of focusing on skills to the employee? What's the best way to get that buy-in? What's the best way to get people to understand it rather than just comply with it?
Yeah. Well, there is an aspect of it that's going to happen whether or not the employee's on board. So maybe just keeping that in mind as background. But I think there are a lot of benefits for employees. I think having a skills-based mindset opens you up to not just choosing roles, but choosing things that can help you develop skills. We talked to an organization a few years ago, and their answer to, it was a mobility study that I was doing, and they said something really profound. They said, not everyone is going to be CEO. And so training them all up to be CEO or setting that expectation is stupid. What we should be doing is saying, hey, while you're here, let's develop the skills that you want to develop, and let's give you opportunities to do that. We can't do that without skills data. So that's one, like the idea of mobility and developing skills that you want to develop so you have more of a portfolio to share with the organization or outside the organization. The other one is opportunities for growth and development, like just making sure that the organization understands what skills you want and what skills you have gives you opportunities for interesting types of work, but it also gives you opportunities, even just from technology, of developing the types of things that you develop. Those types of things are there. Employees do have to give up some information in order to get them, but it can be a mutually beneficial relationship if it's sold that way, and if the organization actually treats it that way.
Yeah. I would also add that, you know, I think knowing about skills or using this whole approach, it actually gives you a lot of currency outside of your current job. So, you know, there's that kind of career validity, you know, career currency, which I think is quite important. We've had a couple of questions about leaders that I just want to, I'm going to mix them up actually, because I think quite a lot of people on the call, that might be quite important to them in their work. So one question says, in my organization, we have many leaders in senior positions who do not have the key skills for developing and leading others. How would you approach upskilling? And I guess we could add other skills in here. So how would you approach upskilling at the most senior level? And then I'm going to bolt another question onto that. With a deep-rooted culture around expertise and experience or knowledge, so not skills, how do you get leaders to shift their mindset towards skills being viewed as the catalyst for future organizational health? So what's the role of leadership in all this?
It's key. So one of them is a development question. How do we develop our senior leaders? And the other one is a mindset question. How do we make sure they have the right mindset? On the first one, the way that I would approach it is as quickly as possible to make sure that they have the skills that they need. Good leadership is hard to find, as they say, and it's really important. And that's why so many organizations spend so much money on their senior leadership, because it is crucial for them to have the right skills and for them to treat the people downstream the way that they need to be treated. There are many ways to do it. At the senior level, you have many, many more ways to do it. We see coaching a lot. We see advising a lot. We see rotations a lot. We see stretch assignments a lot. We see all of those types of things in order to develop. I would also recommend that you don't just start with your senior leadership. You start at least a tier down, maybe 2 tiers down, to make sure that you're developing those as you go, so you don't have this continual let's catch up process. So that's for the development of the skills at the senior level. As far as mindset goes, that's a hard one. It's really hard, especially if leaders turn over quickly and they don't see a future in their organization. There are all kinds of things that happen with respect to this. It's, at least to get it up and going, it's time consuming and it's hard to start thinking in terms of skills. The thing that we have found probably the most useful is to build the systems so that you're not depending on your leaders. So are there ways that you can build in the IDP to talk about skills? Can we structure the performance process to talk about skills rather than job roles or next roles? What can we do to change the language and the environment and the air to talk about skills so you're not relying as much on your senior leadership?
I would add to that one, because I think the questioner specifically said we've got this deep-rooted culture on expertise and experience and knowledge. Is in what way is that truly differentiating for your business? And is that a continued competitive moat? So, and we ask this of ourselves all the time as a research firm that relies on expertise, but, in a world where somebody can go to ChatGPT and get a credible answer, how is the expertise, experience, or knowledge a differentiator for the business versus a skill set? And they're not mutually exclusive, to be clear, but for the sake of this question, but a skill set which can be more malleable potentially and be more flexible and agile for the future of the company. And so if I were kind of in that position, obviously I wouldn't put it quite that directly. I would think about how do we show that the traditional value of expertise and potential experience and knowledge has shifted, and where should we continue to focus on that? Because there's still going to be a place for it, 100%, right? Nobody thinks that ChatGPT gets it right all the time. But where is that in balance with skills? I think it's just really kind of looking at the environment that we're now all swimming in and what that means for the future.
Yeah, it also, that allows you to maybe reconfigure the way that you're doing it. So if you're relying on roles, and we're a very small company, but we have had this problem as well. If you're relying on roles to have all the skills that you need, then your risk is really high. But if you can start looking at work and saying, all right, where do these skills absolutely have to hang together, and where can we create a team so the team is doing the work instead, it changes all kinds of things and allows for all kinds of things that aren't allowed for if you're just relying on person as expert.
Yeah, you're right. And I think skills is part of a bigger journey, isn't it, that's coming towards about changing the whole world of work. And I think career progression comes under that as well. But I did want to ask about, the way that individuals see their career progression, because with skills data, you suddenly have a lot of information about your career that you A, you didn't have before, and B, that you can do something with that your manager isn't necessarily involved in. We see that a lot. So how would you shift the culture and expectations of employees from traditional views of career progression being an upward trajectory or more money to being one of maybe intellectual or role growth? And the person that asked this question says, given human psychology and motivations, is this even realistic given we all work for money? Yeah. Interesting. What do you think about that?
Well, I think it depends on where you live in the world as well.
Yeah.
Western ideology, leans heavily into I am as valuable as my title and or are. That's not true everywhere. I also think we're moving into a place where that can't be true anymore. And we're seeing it in certain organizational cultures. So for example, we tossed around this idea of reputation a few years back, and we haven't really done anything with it. But in a consulting firm, for example, the types of work that you get to work on are as important as the level that you're at the organization, right? So your reputation means a lot. Being able to work on really interesting projects, build your network by working with these different types of organizations is as important as being a senior manager or a director within one of these larger consulting firms. And so thinking about it that way and trying to build that culture within the organization, I think is increasingly important. I don't like to go generational, but millennials and Gen Zs in particular tend to be more malleable to, or more open to these types of ideas than we've done it in the past. We're hearing a lot more about a portfolio career where you're doing all kinds of things and where you're developing the skills that you want, and work isn't worth it unless you're doing something that is interesting. Clearly, we're going to have the way that we've always done things for a while. That's how organizations are built. That's how we pay people. That's how we move people around. That's the type of power we give to people. The momentum behind the system that we have in place is strong. So if you're trying to change the way that people view their jobs, I would start with addressing those systems that are reinforcing that. But I think there's hope because these younger generations are coming up and they're just thinking differently about what they want out of life.
Would you have anything to say about how well education is equipping our young people for a skills approach?
I just had this conversation this morning. I had coffee with someone, and this is the conversation that we had. The short answer is no, it is not. What is getting sort of output from universities is not fitting in well with organizations and what they need now. And that's for a couple of reasons. First of all, education is a beast, and their momentum is even slower than organizations, and they think very traditionally about it. And it is what it is. They aren't there, and it's going to be a while before they get there. The other thing that is interesting, though, and Stacia sort of alluded to this a little bit earlier, if AI is taking all of those entry-level jobs, then we can't use that work anymore to develop the people to the level that they need to be developed in order to be useful to our organizations. So it is a gigantic chasm right now, and all kinds of organizations are thinking about it. The Aspen Institute and their upskilling America is thinking about it. I've talked to several groups that are thinking about this problem. It has to be solved, but we're just seeing teeny tiny pockets in academia. We're seeing some competency-based or skills-based programs. So students are starting to think about it, and they're starting to be sort of certified in smaller pieces rather than just a master's degree in whatever. But it is a long road. I don't know if the collapse of higher education is going to come first, or if we're going to figure out how to do it in higher education. But it's got to. I think we have to do it.
I completely agree. Okay, just shifting
sorry,
a little bit.
Sorry, I might actually offer something that's slightly different.
What?
As the liberal arts graduate, I think it goes back to the question of what is the point of university, right? Is the point of university only to prepare people for jobs and to go into those jobs? Or is it to prepare them to be able to think and be productive members of society, et cetera? And I'm not positing the answer here, but I think that there is a fundamental question right now about what the purpose is of universities and where do people get the skills and how does that fit in? So I think it's a conversation that we don't have the answer for, but I think just saying that universities aren't preparing people for jobs is potentially a little bit concerning because maybe that's not what they're there for.
Yeah, and that is true. And there are universities that are getting away from liberal arts educations, such as yours, because they are not fulfilling the needs of the organizations. And so I totally agree with you, Stacia. I think everybody should have a liberal arts education, like full stop, because that's where you learn to make those connections and critically think and disagree with people that disagree with you. Like all of those types of things are inherent in a liberal arts degree. That is not what I got. I got an engineering degree. But the organizations that are hiring people out of those universities are not looking for liberal arts degrees because there's a level of training that they have to do in order for them to be useful in the organization.
Yeah.
So maybe there's like a step. Like everyone does liberal arts, and then everybody goes to like a training school to get those skills. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. It's actually, we haven't talked about this at all, but it's a really interesting question around, like almost kind of short-term versus long-term, right? Like at some point, the fundamental underpinning of what you get in a liberal arts degree becomes useful as kind of like the core knowledge and skills that you need to get started. You start to graduate, if you will, professionally from those. But like it takes a long time, right? Like there's a much longer return on that investment than coming out and the like. So I don't know. We haven't talked about this. It's super interesting.
Yeah, it is super interesting. And if you look at like the history of education, at one point in this country, in the United States, we had the choice to do Montessori type of learning or worker bee type of learning, and we chose worker bee. And so all the way up from the time they enter school at preschool all the way through college education, they're geared toward the worker bee, which is what organizations expect. But what if we did it differently? Would they be able to adapt and learn more quickly?
Yeah, it's interesting. Becky wrote an interesting comment in the chat saying, but without entry level, where do you learn critical thinking, socialization, etc.? So
yeah,
absolutely. And we're going to have to deal with.
In the UK, I know that we've seen that there's a sort of resurgence of topics like, or subjects like philosophy. You know, that's appeared on the kind of high school curriculum again because it teaches critical thinking. You know, it teaches you a variety of viewpoints. It teaches you how to read at speed and how to form an opinion. But yeah, no, I agree. It's a fascinating subject, and maybe we'll come back to that. I do want to, we're marching towards the end, but I do want to just throw in one last question, because I think it is something that's on a few people's minds, and I think it may be what we might see coming down the line at us. How does skills-first organizations translate all the way through to total rewards and compensation strategies? So how do you align skills with pay and reward? Because, you know, it's like career progression. It's not linear anymore, is it? Or it might not be linear anymore.
So we have asked this question a lot. We've asked it in a couple of roundtables, and in the roundtables, we always get a sort of like, nope, we're not doing that. We're just doing skills for development. Like hands down, that's what we've heard across the board. There are a couple of organizations that are trying it. They're sort of experimenting with it. IBM is one of them. They don't say, hey, we'll pay for skills, but they do say, hey, you've got these skills, they're valuable to our organization. That's going to be a factor in your overall pay increase, because those skills are useful for us right now. I think that's probably a more sane way to do it. Straight pay for skills seems incredibly short-sighted. It misses the context that Stacia's been talking about through this entire thing. But I do see a world where we stop paying for things that we don't need anymore, and we stop valuing things that we don't need as much and start valuing things.
Stacia, would you have anything to comment on skills and reward, the connection or not?
No, I would just, well, I say no and then I keep going. The only thing I would add is we did a podcast episode with a gentleman named Anshul Shiapuri. He was at the time at IBM, that talks about this. And if folks want kind of a perspective on how that might be done, I'd suggest going and checking that out. Teresa, at risk of slightly hijacking, there is one question on here that I wanted to make sure we get to.
Yes.
About the skills versus kind of engagement. Would that be okay if we go there?
Yeah. Which one is that? Oh, the number 18.
Yeah.
Okay. Shall I read it? Okay.
Yeah.
The question is, I keep hearing skills. We have all the skills we need, but employees are disengaged, burned out, and quiet quitting. How does skills chasing help?
So the reason I wanted to go after this one is, one, if you have all the skills you need, that's awesome. You are like doing really well. But two, I think it's important to remember that skills is not the solution for everything. Skills is not going to solve your culture problems or lack of engagement or burnout or any of these other things. It is a particular tool for a particular question, which is how do we ensure a skilled workforce? It is not a tool for how do we ensure an engaged workforce. And I think that there might be some relationship between the two, but it's important to make sure that, back to the graphic that's on here, how do you define the scope and purpose of what you're trying to do and what problem you're trying to solve, and not try to use it to solve every single problem in the organization.
Good point. Thank you for raising that one, Stacia. So look, we've got a few seconds left. I think we'll bring it to a close. I want to say thank you to Danny and to Stacia for their golden commentation here. It's been fantastic. I also want to thank Sue and Callie on my side for looking after things behind the scene. And finally, a big thank you to everyone that joined us today. And thank you for your questions before and during the webinar. I hope that's given you food for thought. I hope it's introduced some new ideas to you, or given you some topics of conversation to take back to your colleagues. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Have a good rest of the day or evening, wherever you are.
Thank you.
Thanks.